All right, I think I'll start because I don't want to be late and I have a lot of slides to get through. I'll try and be fast. Welcome to the Reimagining Streets workshop. It's not really a workshop, spoiler alert. There's a little bit of interactive stuff where I'll show you some stuff interactively on the screen. So that's the workshop part, but it'll be fun, I hope. So yeah, my name is Lennart Nout. I'm an urban mobility specialist with Mobycon from the Netherlands. We are a mobility consultancy in planning and design of sustainable mobility, walking and cycling networks, facilities at a strategy, a policy, but also a street level. Welcome. And our goal is to make the world a little bit less reliant or dependent on the car. So we don't want people to absolutely stop driving cars, but nobody should be fully dependent on a car to get around the city. Why are we here at a sports conference talking about sports facilities? I was a little bit confused in the beginning as well, but I figured it out because our streets are actually the biggest exercise venue that we have. And by organizing our streets in a different way to build in that activity on a daily basis is your only chance to get the full population more active and to make sure that everybody has a healthy and happier life. Because what's the problem? This is the problem. I think we've talked about this today. The obesity rate is a little bit higher than you'd want. And to get all these people to a gym is going to be very difficult. To get all these people subscribed to a membership at a sports club is going to be complicated. I think the easiest and the hardest at the same time is to get these people active in their daily pattern and just the way they get around the city and the streets. Because there's a lot changing in the streets. The streets are not the same as they used to be. There's a lot of changes. There's a lot of different new developments in the way we get around the cities. And thus there's a lot of investment from government in those streets. These are all UK headlines. Manchester has been mentioned a few times for their multi-billion-dollar plan. We've heard earlier today from the Department for Transport about the billions being poured into the streets. So there's the plans are there, the policies are there, but now we have to get down to delivery. And delivering those infrastructure plans is probably the most difficult thing of all. Writing a plan in an office somewhere in London or wherever in the country you are is easy. Getting people on board with these plans, making the changes in their streets is going to be complicated. And I hope we'll help you a little bit with thinking about this in the next 36 minutes. Welcome. You haven't missed much yet, so you're good. Trying to make sure that you get the best bang for your buck, and not just to do it now for bikes, but to make sure that whatever changes we make now are sustainable and can adapt to future changes in mobility that we can or cannot see coming yet. This is a slide that it's a bit long. I know I don't like people who put a lot of text on their slides, but sometimes you have to cheat. This is a poster from LA Metro in Los Angeles. This is their mission. So it's the Transport for London of Los Angeles. Their mission is to have real and lasting change in traffic systems. Unprecedented growth in housing and in number of people that try to get around the city. And they want to be able to face the unknown challenges of the future. And those are the important ones, the unknown challenges. What's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years? Nobody can predict it. If you asked 10 years ago what the world would look like today, probably nobody would have foreseen the extent of the changes that we've seen. So all we know is that it's going to be very difficult and very different from what we think it is now. Especially with infrastructure projects with a long lifespan. You design roads for 100 or 1,000 years. You've got to make sure that you get it as good as you can right from the get-go. So what are these known, unknown challenges that we're facing right now that we can foresee? First of all, which I always, quite new, electric scooters. I hear there was a bit of debate about them here in London. Not legal yet, except for if you cheat and you put it in a park. So that's quite clever. Same goes for the Netherlands. They're still illegal, but in the US they're taking off, and they're taking off in an unprecedented growth. In a city like Portland, about less than 1 million people, 300,000 trips per month on these things, which is very significant and a much faster adoption rate than the bike share ever was. So that's one. Shared cars, the panacea for all. We don't have to own a car, we can just share it. Shared bicycles, well, you know about them. London's doing pretty well with their bike share, but the dockless bike shares are a nuisance or the saving grace of our cities, depends on who you ask. And then last but not least, the growing number of cyclists. It might not be that nationally that number is growing, but where the facilities are built, this number is growing significantly, and somehow you got to deal with it. I read that Southern Bridge, or no, London Bridge, one of the bridges has 28,000 bikes per day, which would make it one of the busiest cycle lanes in the world, because that's our busiest one in the Netherlands is about 35,000 a day. So you can imagine that's a significant change, and nobody would have ever seen that 20 years ago, probably. But these new challenges, are they really that new? Picture on the left, 1918, a motorized scooter was already a thing. A woman standing on it quite gracefully, I think. It's quite a nice way to get around the city. The one on the right is a shared car from the 1960s, the white car. It was publicly available, open for anybody who wanted to use it. A very anarchistic mode of transport at that time. But as you can see, we've been dealing with these same issues for a long time. If we go back a little bit further, if we talk about rising number of cyclists, this is 1939 in Rotterdam. This bridge connects to the southern side of the city. They did a 24-hour count, one of the few solid counts that we have from that time. 77,000 bikes per day, compared to 9,000 bikes, 9,000 cars, 77,000 bikes. So you can imagine, those were the problems we had then, and we are going to face those same problems in the near future. So it's not really that new, we're just trying to reinvent the wheel. This is an article, sorry again, too much text, but I'll give you a little bit of time to read it. A pamphlet from the 1960s, 1968, from Amsterdam, where they introduced the first dockless bike share. White bikes, again, same people from the white cars, that they would just throw around the city, no keys, not locked. Anybody could use them, pick them up, drop them off wherever they wanted. The first free collective mode of transport. And I love the last line, the white bicycle is anarchy, it is something, but it is barely anything. So you should just be able to use it and discard it whenever you want, because it doesn't really matter. Just a way to get around the city. So bike share, 1968, what are we talking about now? Why didn't we solve this yet? In the Netherlands, you probably have heard some of the stories about the change in the Netherlands. These are a couple of images from The Hague, where they used to have significant car parking in the public squares. But in response to the growing number of bikes that we've seen since the 1970s, really, that space has been carved out and given back to people, because we figured out that it was way more efficient to let people walk or sit than to have them driving around in steel boxes that are way too big. So change is possible, but it just takes a very long time. This is not a movement in the Netherlands that has been done overnight. We've been building that bike network for 30, 40 years, well, 50, 60 years now, and we're not finished. We're just keeping to reinvent ourselves in that way. Because this is what we did. In the 1970s, we had a very bad year, a series of bad years, 2,500 deaths on the roads per year, as compared to 500, 600 now. So you can imagine that was mayhem. And then we invented the Vision Zero of the Netherlands, sustainable safety. Well, that was introduced in the 90s, actually. In the 70s, we started to introduce separated bike tracks, carve out space for the bike, the pedestrian, and the car. Seems very simple. It was a very hard and long struggle. It took decades to get to the point where we are now. This is a very typical street in the Netherlands. You have your footpath, which often is a little bit narrow, to be honest, because most people ride their bikes. So we take a lot more care of our bicyclists than our pedestrians. Car parking next to the road, separated from the bike track. Then two car lanes in the middle, and the same on the other side. Quite simple. As a result of that Vision Zero that we call Vision Zero Plus, because we're snobs, but the Dutch version of Vision Zero, which separates streets into these 6 categories. So each street just is one of these. In the urban area, it's only these 2 categories that we have, where bikes and pedestrians use the same road. So it's very simple. It's either a 30-mile-per-hour limit or a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. At 20 miles, you share with bikes. At 30 miles, you have separated bike paths. A very simple system, but because of its simplicity and its uniformity, very, very successful in reducing the fatalities on the roads. But because of these changes in behavior, the growth in number of people trying to get around, the still significant growth in cycling numbers in the cities, the rise of the moped. We're one of the few countries that allow a moped like this to be driven without a helmet, which makes them extremely popular, especially in the big cities. We're currently working on legislation to ban them, or at least push them out back on the road, mixing with the cars and force them to wear a helmet, but that's a whole different conversation we can have later on. But because of this rise, the pressure on that bike lane is increasing. There's too many people trying to use the same space, and there's too many conflicts and differences in speed at this location. You can see the scooters trying to overtake. There's a guy standing here trying to find his way on his phone, and there's a mom with a baby trying to cycle at a probably relatively slow pace. All that in the same 1.5, 1.8 meters of width. That's not gonna work in the long run. So we needed a new way of thinking about the space. That's on the road space. On the footpaths, we figured out that maybe we should take a little bit better care of our pedestrians. We need some more space for people to relax. These kind of activities on the footpath is great to have. It's great for your social cohesion. It's not sports, but that's, we're not just about sports or exercise. But that increasing pressure on the public spaces is starting to get to a crunch point, so we needed a new way of thinking. Another reason for this new way of thinking, these guys on hoverboards, I think they're great. They're currently banned because they keep catching fire for some reason. Not allowed on the roads in the Netherlands, not allowed to be sold anymore in the Netherlands because of the fire hazard, but it's just one of the vehicles that's starting to pop up because of the progress we're making in batteries and electric motors. Electric motors or electric engines like these, you can fit them in any type of vehicle, so that variety of number of vehicles is increasing rapidly. This is another one of those electric vehicles, great for urban deliveries. Cargo bike, but probably 200, 300 kgs, pretty significant and pretty wide as well. If you mix this with a bicycle with an 8-year-old on it, it's not going to end well, given the differences in mass and speed. But technically still forced to use the 1.8 meter bike lane that we have. And then these guys, we've talked about this a little bit. Where do these sit? Are they on the footpath? Are they in the bike lane? Are they in the road? They can go 25 kilometers per hour, so 18 miles, pretty fast, no helmet. But are they a pedestrian, or are they a bike, or are they mixing with the cars? There's no real categorization for these types of vehicles, and we're only at the beginning of this development. So we need to do something about this. So we thought of a process, a very simple process to get to better outcomes for our streets. This is a rough outline of that process. And that process is different from the existing process because we begin with an assessment of the place. What are we looking at when we're talking about this street? If a city wants to transform a street, normally they check the vehicle numbers. Okay, we have 12,000 cars, 8,000 bikes. We don't count the pedestrians, so we don't really know. There's some shops, right? We'll make a judgment call. An engineer will come in and draw out the street and say, that's it. They take it to the community and say, we're going to redesign your street. And they say, oh yeah, sure. We'll trust you and whatever. Or they say, no, this is ridiculous, you're completely wrong. Doesn't quite work in the long run because they disregard the whole concept of place. Streets not just for flow, but also for place, and if the street doesn't deliver anything for the adjacent land owners or the adjacent properties, then it's not really worth redesigning that street in the first place. So we start the process with a place assessment, and there we look at the street. Is it a street for shopping? Is it a street for lingering, for crossing? All these factors that make a good placemaking, or make a good street for placemaking. Then secondary, then we start looking at flow. What is this street in the strategic network? Is it an arterial? Is it a local? What kind of vehicles do we want in here? Is there a lot of deliveries? Is it a safe street for cycling at the moment? If not, why not? And what do we want it to be in the long run? Do we still want cars in here? Do we want to have those little delivery vehicles in here? Scooters, do we want, is this quite a good street for scooters to use, etc., etc. Then we overlap those two networks and we see, does this fit or not? If it doesn't fit, you fix it at this stage. You don't take it through to design and then try and fix it at the network level. And that's quite an important step. So here we say, okay, we want a shopping street, but we have 25,000 cars. That doesn't make sense. You can't do that. That doesn't create a good outcome. And you're going to run into trouble once you try to design this as an engineer. And so then you got to go back and say, okay, we want fewer cars here. Where can we divert some of the cars? Is some of this traffic going to evaporate? What's going to happen? And then you take it through to the next stages. All of this in an interactive process together with the local community. So how do you make that assessment about what you want and where each vehicle sits within the roadway? That's why we went back to the basics, based on the assumption that you want to minimize the risk of death or injury. If you plot the maximum speed of a vehicle with its kinetic energy, you get this line, which means that a cargo bike has about the same kinetic energy as a mobility scooter, because it's the same weight and about the same speed. A race bike has more kinetic energy than an e-bike, for example. But all the way up here, light rail, truck, and bus, you can see that if this is a logarithmic scale, so you can see that this is exponentially more kinetic energy than a person on a bike. So mixing those two is a no-no. That's what we want to avoid. Plotting these, and these are just some of the vehicles that we have on the roads now, you get 5 different families. We call these families of vehicles. So you have the pedestrian and the pedestrian-like vehicles. That might include a hoverboard. You have the bike-like vehicles, which includes the electric bike and other electric, quite light vehicles. And then you have light electric vehicles that are heavier than a bicycle and might include those little cars, Twizzys. Do you have Renault Twizzys? Yeah, they're not very popular yet, but they keep coming with those iterations. And they need to mix with scooters and other micro vehicles. Then you have the car-like vehicles, which includes vans, and above the heavy vehicles, which includes light rail and the trucks. These all are trying to claim the same space in your streets, if you let them. How much time do I have? Am I going to go into all of this? Yes, I will. You're in for the long haul. So based on these typologies, they all have a different speed limit that's associated with them. So you may not want, or people will run up to 15 miles an hour, probably not much faster than that. But bikes, especially speed pedelecs, they can go up to 30 miles an hour. Based on this separation, you can choose what speed is appropriate for your street. It's getting a little bit theoretical, I get that, but we'll get through some more realistic examples. So by choosing which type of vehicle is the most important for your street, you set the appropriate speed limit. So if you say, okay, this is a street with a lot of bicycles, we might set the speed limit at 15 and keep it there so people can cycle around safely. That doesn't mean you exclude all the other types of vehicles, but they have to adjust to the speed of the bicycle. You saw the bicycle street in the plenary session before. That's a very good example of a street where the dominant vehicle is the category B, where bikes are king on the street. Cars are welcome, but they have to adjust their speed to the bikes. This has a lot of implications in terms of how you design it, but also legal implications. We haven't sorted those legal implications because in the Netherlands we like to do things, we'll just put up a sign and see how it goes. It goes quite well so far, but there's no legal framework for a bicycle street in the Netherlands is existing. So that might be something you want to work through if you start thinking like this. What does it look like on the street? This is a few examples from Delft and The Hague, where our office is. So top left, pedestrian environment, pedestrian mall, pedestrianized shopping street. You can have deliveries in there. Oxford Street could be looking like this. You can have deliveries in there, so they're welcome, but you don't design for them. You don't design an asphalt road in the middle with pedestrians on the side. Pedestrians go anywhere. They're the design vehicle. Top right is a shopping street, but there's still a lot of bicycles going through there, so you might want to design it with a bit of a linear element. Bikes are dominant, so they get to, well, you design for them. Pedestrians obviously welcome. Cars might be welcome at some hours, but not always. At 20, 80% of our road network looks similar to this. Bricks, slow speed, quite a lot of cars, but they go quite slowly. And it's more designed for the light motorized vehicles. And then the traditional 50 kilometer, 30 mile per hour road on the bottom right, which you will have a separated cycle track for. Because you can't mix bikes and cars at that speed because of the difference in kinetic energy we saw earlier on. So yeah, that's the separation. We'll go to that. But now, once you've figured all of that out, and that's not easy, but you should have a lot of strategy and policies in place to help you inform in the process before. Then you start to apply that's the vision for the street and apply it to a road network, or to the actual street design, sorry. And this is where you're going to need public participation. It's a dreaded topic. A lot of people don't like public participation because it often looks like this. I don't know if you see what's going on here, but I count statistically significant overrepresentation of gray hairs. And this is a problem because if you do public participation and only people that have spare time can come, then you're excluding a lot of the population. So that's something we want to avoid. Also, somebody is obviously presenting a plan. If you start public participation by giving people a plan and say, rip this to pieces, they will. They will find every little last thing that's wrong with your concept plan, and they'll say, this is ridiculous, get out of my street. We did a project in Southwark for the London, or the Southwark Spine, where we tried to fix a gyratory. And we came in at a stage where the council had done consultation twice and was under threat of being sued from both proponents and opponents, because they both hated the plan that they came up with. But we figured out that they had done the traditional way of consultation, where they had an engineer to draw up a plan, took it to the locals, and they said, no, this is not what we want. The London Campaign for Cycling said, no, this is not what we want. And then they called us. And we were like, oh, this is nice. So we had to go literally back to the drawing board. So we came up, we went in there and we just asked them, what do you want? Show us what you want. But we figured out that there's a bit of a problem. Because we can come in with our Dutch facts and knowledge about what we think is good for the street, but that's like bringing a spoon to a knife fight. We come up with the facts, but that doesn't relate to people in the local community. They know best. Every community is different. Every community says, we're not like Amsterdam. Once you fix it in London, they say, oh, we're not like London. Once you fix it in Westminster, they say, oh, but we're Hackney. Every single community is different. Every person is different, so you can't talk about facts or stuff that works elsewhere. You got to show the stories. And showing the stories can be complicated because bike lash is a thing. I did a little call on Twitter about the best bike lash headlines, and I got quite a few. A lot of them are from the UK, unfortunately, sorry about that. There's a few from New Zealand, which are quite funny. This one is quite good, but it gets better over time. Your tales of cycle lane lunacy. They're mostly complete, or they're often empty, which is, the fact is, a bike lane is empty because it's so bloody efficient, but that's not what you see. That's not the story you see when you look at them. More bike lane lunacy. Despite fears for children's health, if you put a bike lane, the children will suffer. That's obviously a great story, unsupported by fact. You can come in with your science and your research, but this is not going to help. This one's from New Zealand. Auckland is investing significantly in bike lanes. The local press is not always as happy about them. They tried to put in some pretty minor tweaks to the road network, and they got harassed for it very significantly. This one claims another victim. You're like, ooh, that looks bad. The victim is a local dairy, the corner shop. The corner shop was probably already struggling, but once they put bike lanes in, didn't remove parking, but the bike lane killed the local retail. Obviously not true, not supported by fact, but it's a good story. This one's probably one of my favorites. Will do more damage than the Luftwaffe, which is a little bit inappropriate. The bike lane cancer. And this is my favorite. Anti-cycleway protester arrested after attacking traffic island with a sledgehammer. that's next level backlash. Then you know that something's gone wrong in the consultation process and there's no way you're going to fix this. To give Auckland Transport credit, they went back, redesigned the whole thing, and now they're doing a proper street upgrade, not the low-cost thing they were trying to do. But, oh well. Great stories for the newspaper, but facts are out of it. So stories, you got to think about the story, and that story starts with their value. So you got to ask people what they value about their street and what is concerning them about their street. And that's what you use these kind of graphs for. This is in part we use the Project for Public Spaces from the US. They have a very good placemaking tool where they assess, they have a questionnaire where they assess these 4 categories on the left. And then on the right, we ask them about how things are working for the street or for these different users right now and how they would want that to be. So you can do this at the beginning of a project, say, well, it's currently not so good for cyclists here, but we want it to be better. It's currently quite good for cars, but we don't really need it to be that good for cars because it has negative effects. Once you got that down, you can test yourself later on through the design process to see if you're still sticking to that place assessment that you did at the beginning. And then it becomes interesting because then you got to actually design it. You got to come up with a plan, but you don't have to come up with a plan yourself. You'd like to do that in cooperation with the local community. But there's a problem because engineering has developed itself into a science. I use the, yeah, I'll roll with it. Science, and they develop their own little language. Level of service A, who knows what it means? It just looks good. Less delay, sounds great. Who wants delay? Nobody likes delay. 85th percentile speed, nobody really knows what you're talking about anymore. And you really lose track with the local community once you keep talking in engineering language. So there's no common language between local residents and engineers. There's knowledge discrepancy. I'm a transport planner, I'm not an engineer, but I kind of learned the engineering trade on the side. I know what it means when you narrow up a lane to 3 meters or less. But to a community member, that might sound like, oh, you're taking away traffic space. I can't drive my car here anymore. That's a problem. Visual versus vision. A person in the community might know what it's supposed to look like now, but doesn't necessarily have the vision on what it delivers in the future. And an engineer often thinks in constraints. What are the constraints? Okay, we have 12,000 vehicles, we have a 17-meter truck that needs to go through here, a bus needs to turn around in one single U-turn across these lanes. All of these things are not really conducive to a good conversation with the local community. Plus, there's a long turnaround development for option development. If I have a discussion with an engineer and I tell him, oh, I want the lanes to be narrower, the engineer goes away and comes back 3 weeks later like, oh, here's your new drawing. That's too slow. You can't have a discussion if it takes that long to develop options. So we used a tool called Street Mix from the US. Has anybody heard of this before? It's a really neat tool. It was developed by a bunch of volunteers from the United States. Code for America, they're called. And they had a street design tool where you can easily develop street options. But it was very American. And as Dutch people, we don't like American streets. They're very asphalt-based. There's not a lot of options. You can have a bike lane or a car lane, and that's about it. So we wanted something more Dutch. Lucky it's an open source tool. They were happy with us tweaking it to a European or Dutch perspective. So we did. We took it and ran with it. And it's basically a drag and drop cross-section development tool. So if you can think about that, how you want to tell the story, have the discussion with the local public, now you can have the constraints in there without forcing your engineering language on them, which is good. So it's a communication tool. It helps us talk to each other in a common language. You can directly visualize it, so you can see for yourself what happens if I push a button and make a lane wider or narrower. If I take the parking out, how much space do you actually gain? That's all very easy to visualize. And together with an engineer and a facilitator and a bunch of locals, you can very quickly brainstorm about what you could do with the street. People can do it online whenever they want to. They can send it in, and you have a common design language. So that can really bring the stakeholders together and make them feel appreciated for their thinking about the street. So you can use it internally in reports. What do you We use it internally to quickly discuss or brainstorm cross-sections between ourselves. But in meetings with stakeholders, not just with engineers and locals, but with local councillors or other council employees, you can talk and brainstorm about the options. So we use this in Southwark, where we did organize an evening session, unfortunately. That was part of the gig. But we gave them their existing streets. We drew them up in the program, and then we let them have their way with it. You go ahead, take out a car lane, take out the parking, put in a bike lane, whatever you want, give us your options. And it very easily made them realize that there was a lot more space than they thought. They had 6 meter wide car lanes, a single car lane. They were like, oh, we can probably get rid of 3 meters of that. So this is what it looks like. And now I'll switch to a live demo. This is the, oh, sorry. Oh, I did it. Somebody else was doing it for me. There we go. Huh. Rule number 1, never do a live demo on a big screen, but I'm going to do it anyway. So this is a stock standard street that gives you some of the options. But if I say, okay, I want a bus lane out because we're putting light rail in, you can literally drag and drop a light rail. You can say, oh, I want grass under the light rail. It looks much nicer. Oh, I don't like that asphalt lane there. I'm going to put a bike lane in. Make it a one-way bike lane that's raised. And there you go. Within how long did that take? 12 seconds, you've got a new cross-section for your street. As you can see, this lights up in red. That means that according to Dutch standards, it's too narrow. So if you want a street that fits Dutch standards, you can do that by making it not red. If you make it too wide, you'll see this lane is too wide for Dutch standards, and it's unnecessary, you're wasting space. Also, you might have noticed, I've taken too much space now, so that means you're going to get rid of all of these houses on the side. Are you sure you want to do that? Nope, we want to keep it narrow. There's different options. You can put trees in between the parking lots, in parking bays. You can put different buffers in, little hedges, flowers, or just a median. And you can widen the sidewalk to, no, it doesn't fit, to fit your needs. Wait, more. Yes. You can have little bus stops, transit shelters, raised or lowered, bike parking, and obviously, since we're Dutch, we had to put in a canal. There we go. And now you have transformed your street to a very different environment with a little cargo bike in it. And it can go. There you go. Like that. And this is obviously not a great street design, but it shows you a little bit about what the, there we go, that's better, what the options are. Can I change back now, or do I do that myself? Yes. Yes. Oh, awesome. Yeah, so these are some of the examples that we've done with other cities. We've done pilot projects to test the methodology I was talking about earlier, with the city of The Hague, which had a street that looked like this. And they decided that they wanted to redesign it, and our pilot was, or our methodology was a good way to pilot it. So they went from 1.9 meter bike lanes to 2.5 meter bike lanes without actually losing a lot of space. That 2.5 meter bike lane is then suitable for all of those other new vehicles that we said we wanted to have in the future. We want to be able to facilitate on these streets. On a street like this, stuck in between the curbs, that giant cargo bike and those kids on the bike, they would not be very compatible. If you have 2.5 meters, you have a little bit more space to overtake, a little bit more generous, and a little bit more flexibility in your road design. This is one of the bicycle street. We've seen an example in the previous presentation, but this is what it could look like, so you can implement that as well. Put in some bike parking, some terrace patio seating. So yeah, it's still under development. We still keep adding new elements. There's a few things we want to put in adding a login so you can actually store all of your designs. You can now by writing down the numbers, but it's a bit annoying. And we want to make sure we have customized versions for the UK and the US market, so we can make sure that they fit local regulations and design guidance. You can, the best part is it's free. You can all use it by going to this website. It's free for non-commercial use. You can download, you can share, you can look at all the other streets that have been made. It'll generate a little number. We are up to 6,500 now, which means there's 6,500 streets have been generated. Every time you make a significant change to the street, it gives you a number. You can just write that down for later. And then you can come back to the designs that you want. You all got this? Yes, there's flyers here. So that's all for me. I have some time for questions, perfect. So yeah, I hope this gave you a little bit of inspiration on how in the Netherlands we try to design our streets and make sure we cater for active modes now and also in the future, cater for growth, have a bit of flexibility in our street design to make sure that we can deal with the unforeseen that might be a little bit of history repeating. Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes.
Hi, Adrian Griffiths from Architects Chapman Taylor. I'm clearly trying to retrofit cycle lanes to historic town centres.
Yeah.
Including London. It's very, very challenging.
Yeah.
Obviously, the demonstration you've just done there creates, if you're even with a new development, it's creating quite a wide distance between buildings, which one can argue in urban design terms isn't necessarily the best solution. The best piece of news I heard today, for me, is that if cycle is king, if bike's king, why can't we just have bikes on the road? And everyone knows, every single car, vehicle knows that they take priority, and that would just naturally, over time, create confidence that the roads are safe, and it wouldn't require retrofit.
Yes.
What's your view on that?
So the question is, can we fit in the bike lanes in the narrow streets?
No bike lanes. No bike lanes.
If we don't want bike lanes,
they just share the roads.
Yeah.
They are king.
Yeah. Can we share in a safe way?
And all the other vehicles in town centres, and clearly there will be zones that are identified as being those zones.
Yeah.
You might have cycle lanes further out coming into those zones.
Yeah.
What is wrong with that?
Obviously, a very nuanced question. Every town centre is different. Every street is different. I would say the phase that London and the UK are in is you're still building that trust and that confidence in people to ride their bikes. In that stage, you need separated infrastructure on your trunk routes. So in that sense, that's why I think the cycle superhighways, the latest iterations, they deliver that, right? They change the perception of how safe cycling is because you can ride with a child safely there. So I think it's a little bit early to start mixing in more locations because that requires serious down-tuning of the number of cars and serious traffic calming in terms of the speed of cars in those streets. If you can get those numbers below, say, 1,000 vehicles a day and the speeds are actually 20 or less, then sure, then you can mix. That's our whole philosophy on what the Dutch street network is built on.
But if you can't overtake a bike, doesn't that naturally set the speed?
Yeah, but you'll be surprised at how many drivers think they can overtake a bike. So they'll try, even though they technically can't, but they'll try because they think, oh, I can squeeze past because this guy's going so slowly. And if you give them maybe like half a meter of clearance, that's enough to scare me off my bicycle. So you want to avoid that where you can, or minimize the number of times that happens by reducing the volume.
Because again today in some of the presentations earlier on, Cambridge and Oxford were in the UK were the highest usage of bikes.
Yeah.
And again, I think most of those are just riding.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, you shouldn't need separated bike in for everywhere. No, not at all. No, but it takes a little bit of time to get to that stage where you can safely do that. We build bicycle streets where bikes outnumber cars 2 to 1, with a maximum number of cars of about 1,500 to 2,000. If you're under that ratio, then there's too many cars, the car becomes dominant and the bike just gets squeezed out. So that's, if you're looking at those kind of numbers, then you can see that most streets probably don't qualify for that kind of treatment yet. But it's the next step. I think the combination of supercycle highways and mini Hollands, I was very skeptical of mini Hollands. I was like, oh, I don't trust this. But I went to the Walthamstow one, and I think that's the solution for London in the long term, because there your high streets, traffic calmed, hardly any cars, but you don't need cycle facilities because it's so calm. And if that's connected by separated cycle infra on the busier roads, the main through roads, then you're good. So you got all the tools in place, you just need to roll it out. And that's where I think the community engagement becomes critical, because, well, Walthamstow was not easy to get built. Yeah.
I'm from a local authority, so I've been looking at this with that kind of, I've got a cost envelope to work within. How did you manage resident expectations? Show me what you want, show us how you want the street to look. Oh, and they want everything, and it just blows the cost envelope up. How do you manage that? Yeah.
Well, first of all, I think infrastructure here is very expensive compared to the Netherlands. I don't know, we're still not sure why. There must be some competition or volume things going on. Taking cars out is very cheap, so that's always a solution. If they really want a quiet neighborhood, then you put a bollard in and you're done. So theoretically, that's very cheap. Giving them constraints, you can say, within the tool, you can say, all right, we'll keep these curb lines where they are. You can work within the existing right-of-way, for example. That's a very easy constraint where you say you can't touch the footpaths and the curb lines that are next to it. And then often it's the question, do you move the curb lines or not, which becomes the trigger for super expensive reconstruction or not. So that's an easy one we often give them. Yep.
Just quickly, isn't it the case that originally in Holland, in
Groningen, yes.
that there was no infrastructure, first of all. They simply implemented one-way system overnight, and they didn't really tamper with the infrastructure until the following 30 years.
Yeah.
So it came over time. It wasn't, let's design it and build it first and work backwards. And when the money becomes available, it was the other way around.
In the city centre, yes.
Yeah, do you sense there's a sort of critical appetite from anyone you've spoken to outside of Holland to do such things, where there's only £7 per capita to get infrastructure?
Well, in Groningen, which is the actual bicycle capital of the world, 60% bike mode share within the city, which is insane. I studied there, and the word bike was never used in my urban planning course, which is also insane. But it's true, they implemented overnight, literally overnight, with cheap bollards, a lot of policemen at every intersection to guide people the other way. They didn't change the infrastructure, and they kept it untouched for a long, long time. It's still, a lot of the streets still look like car streets. But they just have no cars anymore, because they have they physically separated the city in 4 quadrants. You can't drive from one quadrant to the other without going out and along the ring road that surrounds the city.
Exactly what you said earlier about opposite of Cambridge.
Yeah.
They never had capacity for cars in legal cities, but actually the only way to get such big modal shift,
Yeah.
For example, there
Totally.
was
simply withdraw capacity
Yeah.
at the same time as then building the positive influence.
Yeah. So that's very true, and that's, well, comparatively very, very cheap. It's cheap in finance, but very difficult in political capital. So that's, if you have that political capital, that's the best way to do it, because you'll solve it not just for now, but you'll solve it forever. In Groningen, they did it first in the 70s. The guy who had the plan got it through by 1 vote, and he really, well, he saved the city from disaster, because it was just a mess. Nobody could get through anymore, and that just unraveled all of it. And now they're redesigning the streets, because now they can get rid of the buses through the city center and reroute them around the edges as well. So yeah, in terms of if you're strapped for cash but have a lot of political capital and a very progressive council that will accept these kind of changes, that's definitely the recommended way forward. It's also kind of what Walthamstow did, but because the total budget can't have been that much for the benefits that they got. So that's, yeah, I think that's the best way, but it's hard. That's changing the story, and not just the story of one street, but the story of the city. Yeah. So we can't bring facts. Any other questions? Yep.
If you were to change, you talk about consultation, is there anything particularly you'd like to change around consultation to get a more wider view from the community, and how do you think the best way to go about it is?
Yeah. So to change the consultation, I think you really have to get out to as many people as you can, and that's not waiting for people to come to you on a Tuesday at 7, but being at the local markets, opening a pop-up shop in the high street, which might be empty at the moment, putting out all of the things that you want to do, asking for the values about that street, like what do you value, going for walks with locals with many times. It takes a long time, there's a lot of effort, but it will save you a lot in the long run. We went for a few walking tours with local residents. They were the really loud ones, but you got to take them very seriously, and then get everybody else's opinion secondary or parallel to that. But you got to invite the loud ones individually so they feel that they're being heard and taken seriously. And we asked them, like, what's wrong with this? And all their comments were about speed. Single comment was about cars are traveling too fast. So we're like, well, perfect, we can work with this because that's what we're here to do. And none of them had really thought about cycling. We're like, well, these bikes are coming, whether you build something for them or not. It's just a matter of how many injuries do you want on your streets if you don't design for it. So that changed their thinking. So they calmed down a little bit. But you got to take them seriously and run a traditional evening and invite only or invited process with them, and you got to get out to the wider audience in a shop or on the markets or with a survey. There's lots of ways to do it, but gather more than 20 people because otherwise it's very niche. Any more questions? Because then we're 4 minutes out. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Hope it was interesting. And yeah, if you have any questions, we got some leaflets here up front for